Let's start with a brief history lesson. The year is 2008 and Indycar has just finished a non-points event at the Surfers Paradise Street Circuit in Surfers Paradise. You'd think that would be obvious, wouldn't it? Ryan Briscoe became the first Australian in 18 years to win his home event, but it would also mark the last time IndyCar held a non-championship race, the organisers switching to V8 supercars from the 2009 season. We've had murmurings of a return to the format ever since, most recently with a proposed race in Argentina, which as a Brit I would have had a ton of fun with. But instead, last weekend we got the $1 Million Challenge at Thermal, and now I want IndyCar never to do it again. Hey there guys, I'm Will, welcome to FP1 and the Comedy Review, which has for weeks sat atop a hill, screaming how IndyCar is the best single-seater racing series on the planet, only for Romain Grosjean to punt a Ganassi into the tyre barriers. The season opener wasn't a bad race by any means, but relative to IndyCar's lofty standards, it was a bit of a dud. What better to spice up the action then than an all-new circuit, with an all-new format, and all new ways for the series' resident terrorists to cause some mayhem. Here's your reminder now to leave the video a like and get subscribed for more if you end up enjoying it, but without further ado, let's get into the comedy review. It's the $1 Million Challenge. So before we get into the on-track action, let's just explain how this weekend was meant to work. IndyCar's trip to California and the Thermal Club was basically a glorified test session following the opening round of the championship in St. Petersburg. A time to get to grip with any changes since the previous year and to teach Christian Rasmussen how to drive. At the end of 4 test sessions, the 27-car field would be randomly divided into 2 halves. Each would complete a qualifying session, setting grids for 2 heats in which the top 6 finishers would progress to a grand final. Winning the grand final would grant the driver $500,000, which begs the question, why call it the $1 Million Challenge in the first place, besides the $500,000 challenge not rolling so well off the tongue and America's apparent inability to count? To complicate matters, the heats would last for either 10 laps of the Thermal Club circuit or 20 minutes if a few too many drivers wedged their cars in the tyre barriers. That said, any laps under caution wouldn't count and teams weren't allowed to change their tyres because reasons. The final would see the race distance doubled to 20 tours of the circuit with a half-time break in the middle so teams could refuel and do basically nothing else. This is where a lot of the controversy lies, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, since I can't make $1 million off this video, it's time to say a huge welcome and thank you to today's sponsor, Private Internet Access. The online world can be a bit of a dangerous place. You're constantly at risk of attracting malware and having those single ladies in your local area intercepting your data. VPNs like PIAs help to solve this problem by encrypting all the information sent between your device and the internet. That keeps your online identity and activity safe, whatever said activity happens to be. The benefits go so much deeper than that though. I'm sure you're all aware that Netflix's library changes dependent on your geographical location. So, rather than paying to fly halfway across the world just to watch the decline of Kevin Hart's career, you can use PIA to adjust your location virtually, allowing you to enjoy that from the comfort of your own home. You can apply this to your favourite sports as well. Categories such as Formula 1 and Formula E are free to view in some parts of the world, so using a VPN can help save you an extra subscription in the long run. One of the big benefits of PIA is now with just one subscription, you can protect as many devices as you'd like, rather than be limited to a few, which can be the case with some of the other VPNs out there. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, then you can sign up to PIA now via the link in the description. You'll also get 83% off and 4 months for free through that as well. Thanks again to PIA VPN for sponsoring this segment of the video. Now let's get on to the on-track action. So as I said, the non-championship round acted more like an extended test session for the IndyCar teams to start out with. And since there really isn't much material in here, I'm just going to cut it down to the bare-bones highlights. Reigning series champion Alex Palou would top the first session, which saw cars go off quite a lot. The bumpy nature of the Thermal Club layout was also a highlight, Stingray taking his Jesus car on a trip to meet his maker fairly early on. Palou would hold his advantage on Friday, taking top spot in Test 2 as even more cars went off, and Christian Rasmussen fulfilled his role of testing the red flag procedure. Pietro Fittipaldi also had a moment, parking his MyJack Honda in the middle of the track, just a couple of days before George Russell would make that call in Australia. The bouncing would also make a return, though since IndyCar drivers aren't like those pussies driving Formula 1 cars, they just sucked it up and dealt with it. Test 3 would see even more cars go off, and another red flag, though for once it wasn't due to Christian Rasmussen. Instead, Thermal had joined the club of racetracks that aren't very good at staying racetracks. Joseph Newgarden not asking for consent before giving the outside curbs a striptease early into Saturday. When we got going again, Grosjean would take a particular liking to the gravel traps dotted around the circuit. Roman has a bit of a history of getting closer to the sand dunes than most would want, and after watching his teammate shower Calamirlot in a heap of Californian dirt, the Frenchman would one-up the 76 car by getting stuck on the exit of turn. I don't know, they all look the same around here. At least the gravel had done its job and there was no serious damage to Roman Shunko's car. In fact, no one had got anywhere near a barrier over the entire weekend so far. Oh, never mind, I've spoken too soon. Carl Kirkwood attempted to optimise his rear wing with 45 minutes left on the clock, increasing its angle of attack with a bit of help from the Armco barrier. We're fairly used to seeing Andretti's in the wall, as we are seeing Palou when the session fastest. Though not today, with those honours going to McLaren stand-in Calamirlot instead. We get one more test before qualifying set the grid for the 2 heats on Sunday, and with strong winds and a sandstorm delaying the session, Pato O'Ward was looking for new ways to take out the competition. When we actually got going, even more cars would go off, and Christian Rasmussen was back to doing Christian Rasmussen things again. Among the rest of the grid, Scott Dixon forgot what way the track went, Will Power attempted copying Stingray's lines for some reason, and Christian Lundgaard would find himself at the top of the timing sheets ahead of group qualifying on Saturday afternoon. The action was so riveting by this stage in the weekend, Indycar's commentators were busy sharing stories from their past. This included Townsend Bell reminiscing about his debut race in karts, which took place on, 9/11. With everyone in the mood then, Group Quali would get underway, and with just 8 minutes to get a lap on the board, things should have been exciting. So let's watch Lundgaard work out whatever the Ferrucci's doing today. Dixon would set the pace early on, with series debutant Nolan Seagull living up to his name and shitting on the competition. The number 18 Dale Coyne racer was second, though he'd struggle on the final runs and be forced to start his heat from 12th. Felix Rosenqvist would end up snatching pole as we geared up for Group 2, which contained Rasmussen, meaning we might actually get some excitement this time. Christian actually did a decent job to go P2 in the early minutes, though the number 20 car was quickly shuffled back, a bit like Max Verstappen on the opening laps of the Australian Grand Prix. As the seconds ticked down, a bit of a haze was forming on the Thermal Club circuit. Marcus Ericsson decided that could work quite well with a bit of dust and thus tapped into the 28 car's predecessor to ram it into the wall and bring out the first red flag of qualifying. Cars would get just one more lap to make the difference and the two Ganassis would snap up the opportunity. Armstrong first topping the times, followed by Palou shortly after. Graham Rahal would then experience a momentary lapse in his dementia, going third in the dying moments, and with our 2 pole sitters established, it was over to the heat races, and for this weekend to go truly tits up. With no points on the line, how aggressive the drivers would be was completely up in the air. Well, when Rosenqvist and McLaughlin led the field away for Heat 1, Scott Dixon made his approach very clear. The Kiwi had struggled in quali and found himself towards the back end of the field. Since only the top 6 cars progressed to the final, he'd have to get his overtaking shoes on. Or toe punt Grosjean, I guess that works too. Roman, for once involved in the crash that wasn't entirely his fault, careered across the track collecting Rena's VK, with Will Power lucky to escape as well. Dixon's plan had worked, with the Ganassi driver now 5th, but he'd forgotten whilst it was a non-points event, the stewards were still annoyingly around, handing Scott a drive-through and effectively removing him from the running. With several big hitters out then, an opportunity arose for the likes of Stingray Robb, who had been having a quiet weekend up to now, in his traditional spot at the rear of the field. So tell me how after all this he's still in 11th. Anyway, we'll go back to the opening lap as McLaughlin was putting the pressure on Rosenqvist, and it'll be nice to see a battle for the lead, given we won't be seeing it again for the remainder of the video. You think I'm kidding? The extended highlights literally cut from lap 1 to the final tour, where Rosenqvist came across the line, with everyone fighting more with their tyres than the other cars on track. Maybe Heat 2 would be better. Or maybe it would be even worse, Palou fending off a pitiful attempt from Armstrong, then driving Max Verstappen style into the distance. Further back, the McLarens tried to put on a show, stand-in star Eilert continuing to hold his own, before being bullied out the way by Rossi and O'Ward. They would continue to team up as they dispatched Blomqvist, setting us up for a final duel between the pair to see who gets to progress to the... No, never mind, it's the final lap now apparently. Palou would win, obviously, and now we had our 12 drivers going for the $1 million that wasn't actually $1 million. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a few things. Firstly, this final would be double the distance of the heats, and since the IndyCar Firestones were barely able to survive 10 laps, many wondered how exactly we were going to manage 20. It seemed this had been the plan by the race organisers all along, expecting a furious scrap as the drivers clung to dear life in the closing stages. That's not quite how it played out though, with the race effectively neutralised by an artificial red flag, or half-time as they like to call it. Some of the IndyCar teams had an idea. And so when Palou stormed away at the green once again, keep an eye at the back on Colton Herta. Or maybe it's Stingray Rob. Anyway, it's hard to tell, he's so slow he's out of shot already. The highest paid driver on the grid had decided to go as slowly as he could, knowing that the gap would effectively be taken away come the halfway mark. And when everyone else cottoned on to what he was doing, the opening 10 laps became an utter farce. It's a miracle then, with cars driving so slowly, that some of them would still manage to f*** it all up. And by some of them, I mean Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing. The team had managed to get all three of its cars into the final, but somehow under Field Fittipaldi's entry, whilst Graham Rahal's car wasn't even letting him drive slow due to a stuck throttle. When everyone finally crept over the line at the end of the first half, Palou still led the way, with Herta a whopping 2 minutes, nearly a whole lap behind. Yeah, funnily enough, I don't think this is quite what IndyCar had planned. Maybe though, we'd see a payoff in the final 10 laps, as Herta battled his way to an unlikely victory. Well, that was made easier when Rahal asked if he could fix his car, and the stewards basically told him he could go himself, then proceeded to disqualify Fittipaldi too because his team couldn't count the fuel gauge. Colton was also aided by the fact the first car on his hit list was Augustine Canapino, who yeeted himself into Rossi down at turn 1 and let the American slip by. The McLaren ahead had also clearly saved his tyres, easily dispatching Lundqvist and getting on the rear of St. Pete winner Newgarden. Joseph wasn't too fond of this idea though, and having realised he stood no chance against the cars in front, decided he'd just with Rossi's race instead. That allowed Herta to pass the pair, and soon enough, the Andretti driver was up to 5th. Maybe this audacious strategy could just work after all. Well, when it took 4 of the remaining 7 laps to pass the next car Armstrong, perhaps not. That would be the last overtake in a race weekend I'm very glad to see the back of. Palou would cross the line and win the cash, which no doubt will go towards his next contract dispute. Good for him, now let's never do this again. If you've watched my channel for a while now, you'll know I'm a huge advocate of IndyCar. I appreciate this video makes me out to be yet another Brit on the series, but genuinely, we've had such good action over the last couple of years. It's just a shame that the opening 2 rounds of 2024 have been lackluster at best, and this non-championship experiment ended up making the sport look pretty foolish in the eyes of many. Perhaps I'm in the minority though. Probably not, but if you actually like this weekend, do let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, drop the video a like and get subscribed for more IndyCar content in the future. We've got an entire month before the next round in Long Beach, but I'll have plenty of action and videos in the meantime, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Before I go, I'd like to say a huge thank you to PIA VPN for sponsoring this video, and to all my patrons and channel members for their support. If you want to get my videos early, then you can find all the relevant information down in the description below. I'll be back very soon with another video, but until then, have a good one.